in the Pentagon as there's a kerfuffle within that front office, the Secretary's front office, between his advisors as well as the deputy's advisors. They are fighting each other. They're trying to outshine one another. Finally, they were given the heave-ho.
Hi, welcome to Superpowers, the future of global security on Times Radio. I'm James Heappey, and this week I am joined by Jim Townsend. Jim was the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Defence during the Obama administration with responsibility for Europe and NATO. And since then, he is a fellow of numerous think tanks and remains an important commentator on the transatlantic relationship, Euro-Atlantic security, and much more besides. So, Jim, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you for asking.
It's become the norm on Superpowers to have to timestamp our recordings each week because even in the short time the brilliant producers take to put us up online, the world has a habit of changing. So it is Thursday afternoon US time, and this is the day that the UK and US have just signed a trade deal. Lots of detail yet to be clarified. India and Pakistan appear to be on the brink, which is interesting times. We've got a new pope, so all sorts of stuff going on. But if I may, I want to start just with your reflections on what's been going on recently in the DoD. Feels like Trump has had a bit of an epiphany after the Pope's funeral and sort of a lack of progress with Putin, and that perhaps he is now more willing to support the Ukrainian cause. But then there's all sorts of stories of Hegseth taking a different view. You got any inside information?
I really don't, and I'm not sure anyone does, because even the insiders, as you say, it's got to be time-stamped as well in terms of what they talk about, because it changes so much. And so you mentioned the DOD and Secretary Hegseth. So in addition to being a Deputy Assistant Secretary, I was a civil servant in that building for something like 35 years. So I know very well what it's like to work with the Secretary of Defense, to work with that front office, and to what it takes to really keep the trains to move on time. And that's a problem right now in the Pentagon as there's a kerfuffle within that front office, the Secretary's front office, between his advisors as well as the deputy's advisors. They are fighting each other. They're trying to outshine one another. Finally, they were given the heave-ho. They're now throwing each other under the bus, as well as Hegseth. So it looks bad in terms of management. Hegseth, that's his office. So he looks bad publicly, and we don't know what Trump thinks about that. We know he's been on thin ice. But what's more important is whether it comes to India, Pakistan, whether it comes to Ukraine and Putin, that front office, that Secretary of Defense plays a big role. And to do that, the Secretary needs to have a strong front office of people who know how to work the building, who can work the interagency, who can take DOD into the action in the White House and come up with ways ahead. And right now, I can't see that the paperwork is getting to where it needs to go and that the Secretary is being told what he needs to know as he goes off to deal with these crises, like India, Pakistan. That's something that's not intuitively obvious to a lot of people, and it's got nuclear implications, obviously. It's hard to escalate. So what is the Secretary of Defense supposed to say and do about that? The Secretary himself, that office at least, holds a lot of sway in both of those capitals, in India and in Pakistan. So what Secretary Hegseth says will have resonance. So what's he supposed to say? Who's telling him these things? What are his talking points? So there is so much in what you were asking about that we're watching unfold in front of our eyes in a bit of a horror state, thinking that when does this movie end? When can we find something that's positive coming out of that building?
Let's break it down then. I mean, tell us first of all about the DoD as an institution. You know it well. In my experience, incredibly professional and well used to working to the will of the political administration of the time. But everybody that I know in the DoD tells me that the line is about double standards. And so the Secretary using Signal a number of times to communicate potentially classified information just sort of crosses a line in the DoD that means people very quickly start to question whether or not he's the guy. How toxic can that be when that sort of thing creeps in?
Well, it's very toxic. And I know to a lot of people listening, they might think that it's small beer. So we all mess up on social media. We all do these kinds of things. The problem here, though, is when you're in the Pentagon and you're the Secretary of Defense, you are in a whole different place. You're not out in the wide world the way you were. You're now in a place that is very careful about what it says, how it's said, and then how his actions are telegraphed down into the bureaucracy and into the military as well. When I was there, and it's certainly still the case, if you're a civil servant, you are bound by very strict ethic rules as well as security rules of all types. You don't use your personal devices inside the building. Everyone's in these skiffs, they're called, these secret protected rooms to have secret conversations, etc. And you pay attention to the rules, and everybody does, from the secretary all the way down. When the secretary appears not to be doing that, as you said, a double standard, where he feels he doesn't have to do that, that sends a terrible signal. Where it's not just on that particular point, but what other things is he not doing correctly? Because it just so happened that the signal information that he leaked the first time was operational military from a military operation where you're actually putting people's lives in danger. This isn't, potentially telling the world about some conversations between heads of state or something like that. This is military operational secrecy here, OPSEC. And so this is something that means a lot to the military. And so this sets a bad feeling down through the ranks that either he has got a double standard or he doesn't know enough not to do it.
So in the UK, if something like this were to happen, where a serving minister had sort of let the side down, the Chief of the Defence Staff would probably come and say hello and educate you a little on the way that things are not done, and encourage you to be better next time. That sort of dynamic exists in the DoD as well? Can the chairman or somebody walk in and say, "Hey, Mr. Secretary, this ain't cool"?
I would say no.
Right.
I would say they should, and I would say that in the past, perhaps someone might have come into a new Secretary of Defense and sat down and in a very diplomatic way, kind of laid out, how things need to be done, et cetera, et cetera. I think today, to directly answer your question, given who Hegseth is and the way he operates, I can't see anyone sitting down with him and telling him something without being fired on the spot. And that's a problem, because if in fact he's operating out of ignorance and he doesn't have a special assistant or someone that he trusts working with him that might be able to say something like that, then he's operating totally blind. And that puts at risk whether it's a pilot on an aircraft carrier or information that we're trying to keep from the wider world that he knows that we need to keep within the building. So, this idea of someone coming in and saying, "Hey, let me educate you a little bit," I will tell you that if I did that, or if a two-star general did that, or a member of the senior executive service, the very senior civilians, they would be fired. There's no, there's no wiggle room here. There's no letter of, criticism, or there's no slapping on the wrist on something like releasing this kind of information on a reoccurring basis. So I don't think there's anyone suggesting that he stop it. I think they're going to try instead to play defense. Certainly his outer office, they're trying to play defense and keep from him things that he might release accidentally, or make sure that he knows when he's handed a piece of paper that you've got to keep this locked up, or whatever.
And yet in a world as fast-moving and as volatile as the one that we're living through at the moment, that feels like entirely the wrong way to have an outer office interacting with the secretary. I mean,
that's exactly right.
Very challenging. But he is presumably pretty unsackable, given that Trump has just lost Waltz. To lose two members of your senior national security team in a fortnight would feel unnecessarily chaotic.
Well, Trump does not want to be seen as Mr. Chaos. He was seen that way in his first administration because he went through so many different senior officials in his office. 2 or 3 national security advisors left, et cetera, et cetera. So he is loath to look, exactly as you point out, he's loath to look like he's got chaos again. But I think Hegseth himself and what he's doing makes him sackable. And so it's a matter probably of time. And maybe one more, straw to break the camel's back, if you will, given enough time between Waltz, that relief, and then maybe Hegseth. But I think you're absolutely right. This, Trump wants to look firmly in charge and in command and confident. That's the way he operates anyway. He doesn't want events to unseat that view of him. And chaos in some of these offices, they make him look bad. He gets bad press. So I think we're going to see a time where Hegseth could be shown the door because enough time has elapsed. He might have done something else. And it doesn't look like he's kowtowing to the press. That's the biggest thing for Trump, is he doesn't want to take an action because it looks like he can't take pressure from the press. So he's going to wait for that to die down before he takes an action like relieving someone.
So the person I've found really interesting to read about, and I'm working my way through his book at the moment, is Bridge Colby. And I wonder, what if you're familiar with what he's written and what his mind is. As a former Assistant Secretary with NATO and Europe specifically to focus on, what do you make of that view that America's interests don't lie in Europe anymore and that the US should look pretty much exclusively to the Indo-Pacific and perhaps the Middle East?
Well, that's a great question. I do know him somewhat. The Europe-NATO community in Washington is actually very small. Yeah. We all know each other one way or another. And so when he was made the undersecretary, which is a very influential position in the Pentagon, I was wondering how he was going to square his China first view, and he's very radical on that, very strong on China first. He lays out his argument in these books and things like that. But once you become the undersecretary, you can't just be a one-trick pony. You've got a lot of problems on your hands because you deal not just with other regions, but also other problems, other issue sets, functional issues. He has to deal with intelligence issues. He has to deal with arms control. He'll have to deal with nuclear policy. He has to deal with budgets and that type of thing. I mean, it's all-encompassing. So he has to have room in his mind for something other than China. When it comes to Europe-NATO, he and I have talked about that. And I have waved the Europe flag, and I think there was a time when that would upset him a little bit because he felt that too much effort had been put into Europe because of that. He did say something recently about the deployment of the UK aircraft carrier out to the Indo-Pacific, saying, I'd rather that be staying around Europe to take care of a European contingency. So he is thinking about it and acknowledging that there is a European contingency. He could have said, yes, we send both of those carriers to the Indo-Pacific. Send all of your military there. This is what we've got to all focus on. But he didn't. And he said, could you stay around the European theater to handle a Russian contingency? So to me, that was a little bit of a breakthrough. He might be upset if I were to say that. But I think, for me at least, in terms of priorities, I will accept that China is a priority for us, and I will accept too that Europe has got to take on more of that burden in terms of European defense, etc. That's old news. We talk about all the time, and I think what we're going to see with Bridge is that he's going to have to follow the guidance he's going to get from the president himself, because at the end of the day, it's Trump that's going to tell him where does he want the Pentagon and the Undersecretary's office? What's the priority for Bridge? And he might very well say, well, look, okay, it's China for you, Bridge, and we understand that, and we're glad you're here, but we have other issues too that we want you to if in fact Trump is concerned about where Ukraine is going and is concerned about Putin, that maybe he's being tapped along, that he feels that we need to start thinking about more assistance to Ukraine and have that put pressure on Russia. Bridge is going to be in the middle of that. So it might be the president goes to Bridge and says, love what you're doing with China, love it, but you need to help me with Russia right now, because if I'm being tapped, I want to make sure we push back and use some leverage. And that's going to come from you, Bridge, because it's your assistance packages to Ukraine that's going to put that pressure on. So let's see how he handles that.
Well, I mean, it strikes me that there are two parts to the US role in Europe. One bit is the security of continental Europe, discuss the degree to which that is the United States' responsibility. And the difficult thing for Europeans like me is that a lot of what Trump is saying is entirely true, that we've completely undervalued our security, taken American investment as a free good, and we deserve to be told to do better. But then I think there's still a discussion about the degree to which the US can properly disinvest from Europe for the sake of its own interests in Europe. But then the second part of it, And I'd be interested to get your view on how someone like Bridge Colby would argue this point. There's no way in the world that the fight with China only happens against the PLA Army, the PLA Navy, PLA Air Force in the Pacific theater, because that would allow the United States to concentrate force in the Pacific. They will send the Russian Northern Fleet out into the Atlantic to threaten the US Eastern Seaboard. So US investment in the Euro-Atlantic isn't just about digging out the Europeans. This is actually about the security of the US homeland as well. Is that just an inconvenient truth, or would he tell me that that's not an issue?
Well, I would hope he would tell you that it is an issue, because it certainly is. And Bridge has a strategic mindset. He knows that these two theaters are linked in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So, but I think if he's talking to Trump and Trump has another mind, he'll have to probably keep that to himself, you know. But I think your point is really well taken, and I believe there was a something released today from the visit of President Xi to Moscow, where in that statement, I think it's a Chinese statement, where she says exactly what you said, which is Russia is very interested and very supportive of China and China-Taiwan and that issue. And so they see the world the same way in Asia. So if anything, if you've got a Bridge Colby's mind, which as I said is strategic, he's a good man for that job. He needs to see that if something happens with Taiwan and China, you're going to feel it with Russia as well. Russia's going to want to do something. You mentioned the eastern seaboard of the U.S., but maybe it's Estonia. Maybe it's gray zone activity in Europe, where suddenly there's some Europeans might die in a train derailment that was sabotage caused by the Russians. I mean, you're going to see them acting in concert one way or another. Same thing with Russia and Ukraine. If China begins to blockade Taiwan, you can bet the Europeans are going to get pretty nervous, and Ukraine too, because maybe the Russians are going to take advantage of that distraction of the United States with China and Taiwan to, you know, there's going to be all kinds of playing off one against the other. I hope that's the understanding of Bridge, that he understands that there's, you know, it's three-dimensional chess here. It's not just China, China, China. So, but at the end of the day, it depends on what Trump himself thinks. Trump is going to give the orders out to everybody saying, I don't care about Ukraine, focus on Taiwan, or something else. I mean, we don't know. It would be helpful if we got a national security strategy out of the administration to give us an idea of what at least some people are thinking there. But your question is an excellent one, and it shows the complexity that Bridge is going to have to operate in, particularly when he deals with a Secretary of Defense who might not be as strategic-minded as he is.
In talking to friends on the Hill and around town this week during my visit to Washington, it's interesting. People have described that within the administration there are Iran hawks, there are China hawks, there are Russia hawks, and then there are sort of American isolationist, almost pacifists. And very, you know, I mean, clearly that last group is mutually exclusive from the others, but actually the Iran hawks, the Russia hawks, the China hawks tend not to be the same people either. And that Trump sits astride this sort of slightly curious assembly of national security minds who don't really agree on what America's role in the world is, nor what America's main threat is. And what people have sort of said, curiously, is therefore, for Trump's success is basically just to avoid any war, because then you don't have to, the showdown doesn't come between the Iran hawks and the isolationists, or the China hawks and the isolationists, discussed, because it doesn't feel like events are going to quite allow that to be the case.
No, and you know, I think Trump likes it that way. Trump doesn't want to have a solid front coming from his people or from the bureaucracy. He wants to see that conflict. He thrives on that, from what I understand.
Interesting.
He thrives on that. He thrives on seeing two officials fighting each other in front of him. He likes the sport of it, probably. You know, and also he likes to hear all these views, because he knows at the end of the day, he's going to call the shots, because they're all fragmented. You have the various hawks of various stripes and other types of fellow travelers in there. And at the end of the day, they depend on Trump to say, okay, this is what I want. And he's picked people who will do what he says. In other words, these all might be hawks. They might all have their views on various things, but they're also at the same time willing to do exactly what Trump wants them to do. So I think this is something that he thrives on. I understand Franklin Roosevelt also liked to have that kind of thing too. So for those Democrats listening, it runs in the family. So
Well, so there's something about, that a strong leader is one that's willing to see the staff take opposing positions and argue it out.
and hear all the views.
And there's a thought that leads to more rigorous policy making. I'd be interested to hear you say that that's the case in this case.
Well, it's a great point. If he did his homework, then and then he listened to this fighting in front of him, I would feel better about what comes out of it, because Trump isn't depending on that fighting happening in front of him to make up his mind on what to do.
Yeah.
If he does his homework, if he has other people who call him with advice, if he's someone that listens to everyone and then makes a decision based on what he's hearing. Sometimes I think he makes his decision based on the person who last talked to him. And sometimes I think he goes with his gut, which I think dates to about 1970 to the mid-'80s. From the things he says, it sounds like something I heard back then. So I think generally having in front of you people who are willing to fight it out in front of the president, their point of view, that can be helpful if it airs different approaches and it helps you in making up your mind. But if that's your only source of information on making up your mind, particularly with Trump, he might go after the strongest, the loudest voice or the biggest fist that's being shaken, instead of going after actually what's a reasonable point of view. So we know he doesn't like to read. We know he doesn't really have the staff, certainly in the Pentagon now, to put together briefing papers and that type of thing, to go up to the White House. And even if, as I said, even if they did, he doesn't necessarily read it. So I think we're stuck with that as his decision making. If he doesn't have his own innate feeling about something, he's going to listen to those people who are fighting. Then he will call someone that he really trusts. It might not be someone in Washington. It might be, a CEO somewhere or someone in Hollywood, Mar-a-Lago, who knows, and ask them for their point of view. And then he might go with that.
So I want to tap into your expertise to get some predictions for the NATO summit. But just whilst we're talking about the way that the DoD works and the way that advice forms and decisions are made, when you've got an emerging geopolitical tension that's what's going on in India and Pakistan at the moment is it's coming about relatively quickly, quite dangerous potentially, but equally could go away tomorrow without any more noise. But one would have thought that it's exactly the sort of thing that a US administration would be quick to think through, take a position, be speaking to both sides, trying to de-escalate, especially given that both sides are nuclear armed. But you've described a dysfunctional process, both and a lack of bandwidth in the DoD, that is concerning. Do you have a nervousness that America right now isn't able to properly inform itself and make decisions on global matters like that?
I would say, in general, the decision-making process within Washington is not as good as it needs to be. There's a policy flow, there's a paperwork flow, there's a way in which the best advice is sent from those experts in the military or the civilian side, in the Pentagon in this case, up to the president, where he discusses that with his most senior leaders. He's got these options laid out and this type of thing. And that can move very fast if it needs to. I will say that I have also seen too much discussion, too many papers written, no decisions being made, lots of meetings with the president or right below his level at the NSC around a table, and that's not good either. And I saw a lot of that during some of the past Democratic administrations, where they talk things to death. Yep. What's different here is that with Trump, for better or for worse, a decision can be made like that because it's Trump making it himself. And maybe he sits there and says something based on his gut, and off they go. He doesn't need the NSC to have a meeting and options to be presented to him. He doesn't need to know what the U.S. military thinks about that. He will go ahead and make a decision. So it moves even faster than other administrations. But that doesn't mean that it's an informed decision. It just means it's quick.
So, if you read the comments below our discussion, you will see all sorts of ways of saying that the administration is dysfunctional, doesn't work, and that they don't like Trump. By accident, that speed of decision making does cause countries all around the world to sit up and take notice and be far more responsive to what America is and isn't doing.
Right.
And so there is this sequence of events that you can see over the next couple of years where by accident or by design, Trump ends up sorting out a whole load of the world's problems. You take the sort of Gaza-Largo proposal, reacted to with horror in Europe, but the Arab world has coalesced around a sort of sense of purpose that no one else has been able to achieve. Yeah, it just there's a sort of there's a genius to the madness.
Yes, yes, no, you're right, and golly, and there's a lot of people who hate that because they want to blow up, you know.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right. He's grasped the nettle on a lot of things, and in a lot of ways, I heard someone talked about this a couple of days ago. A lot of ways, voting him in by the American people, they voted him in not because they liked him or anything, but that he does things, and they want something done. Tony Blair said this in California a couple days ago at the Millikan Institute. He was talking about this, about Trump, and about fell over. I don't know if you want to have this in, but he said, you know, when I became a prime minister, I expected that things would happen. And I would say, do this, and it'd be done. And he said, after a year, I found nothing had happened. And he said that is the strength of Donald Trump and why he was elected, because people know that he will do things. And your point is well taken, because whether it's, you know, a lot of silly things, the Gulf of Mexico versus the Gulf of America, the Arabian Gulf now, Mount McKinley, so many silly things that he's done. But what's interesting about this is that these things stick under the craw of a lot of American voters. They're not something you would hear about in Washington, in the Beltway here, and the think tanks and this type of thing. That's you know, we're above that kind of issue set. But for a lot of American people, seeing Trump do these executive orders, which most presidents don't operate with that. They operate in a different way. He signs these things out, he takes these actions, and it actually scratches an itch. And so, but whether it's Gaza, whether it's Ukraine, I mean, for Ukraine, for instance, we weren't making a whole lot of progress on Ukraine. I mean, even though there was a lot of assistance going to Ukraine, you know, we'll be there as long as it takes, all this stuff coming out of the Biden administration, no one really knew where this was going.
No, and there was a lot of caution. You know, I remember being involved in decisions around main battle tanks, Storm Shadow cruise missiles. You know, there was real caution and hesitation on this side of the pond, a real nervousness that Third World War would start. I guess that, you know, the sort of US threshold that a single US fatality is war, you know, means that people calibrate much more carefully. But I mean, I agree. I mean, the Biden administration did lots. They spent lots of money. They moved the dial in Ukraine, no doubt. But they were incredibly cautious in everything that they did.
They were, and that is the topic of a lot of discussion in Washington now about were we self-deterring, particularly when it came to nuclear issues.
Yeah.
The rattling of that nuclear saber made us too cautious in some ways. The West too cautious, but for good reason. I mean, why would you be, you know, not cautious in something like that? But does that then hand your opposite number a bit of leverage that is hard to deal with? We in the West need to be able to have something to say to someone who rattles a nuclear saber, to let them know that that's not going to work on us, and that's a whole other discussion. But you're absolutely right. There was a lot of caution there. And that administration, as well as the Obama administration, was known for being overly cautious across the board. And so I think as we look at the follow-on administrations after Trump and into the future, particularly Democrats, is there a possibility to have an administration that is in between a Democratic one that just talks things to death, or Trump that gets things done, but sometimes at great cost and at great upheaval?
So he's going to arrive in The Hague in, sort of 6 weeks' time or so for the NATO summit. You will have Sherpa'd lots of NATO summits in your day. What's going to happen at this one? I mean, it's hard to remember one where everybody else is going to be quite as nervous about the outcome as they will be in The Hague. No, not everybody is going to have met his requirements for defence spending. In fact, very few countries will have done so. Are we going to see a big blow-up?
Well, it's like watching a car race, the Indy 500, whatever. People who watch these car races, they watch it not because they like the race. They watch it because they want to see the big car wreck, the big smash up, and that's what they like. So there are going to be a lot of people just eating popcorn and watching TV, waiting for the big blow up and for Trump to stomp out. It's an interesting question, and I think there will be nervousness there about that kind of thing. But I will say that Trump loves that. He loves to walk into a room and have people uncertain about what he's going to do. He said that. He likes to be someone who you can't really tell what he's going to do. That gives you a lot of leverage. When he walks into that room, he can have allies do a lot of things that he wants them to do just by making it look like he's getting ready to stomp out.
Absolutely.
And so, and there's some allies who stand up to him, the Danes, for instance, or others, but at the end of the day, that only goes so far with him. And then they have to cut a deal. And he knows that.
So my hunch is we had that run of speeches, all within the space of about 8 days of each other, where the vice president spoke in Paris, Hegseth then spoke at a NATO summit in Brussels, and then the vice president spoke at the Munich Security Conference.
That was a hell of a time.
Whoa! Europe was shell-shocked on the back of that, because it wasn't just a criticism of European defence spending and its and how it had freeloaded US position on US defence and security. It was a sort of an affront on European values and the way that we order our democracies and our societies. It was full on. I have a hunch, exactly as you say, that Trump will revel in how nervous everybody will be, and yet when he goes, he will be sweetness and light. He doesn't need to do what Vance and Hegseth and others do as his outriders. He's the president.
I think you're right. It's leverage for him. If he were to storm out of NATO and say, "Look, we're out of here," he's throwing away his leverage on how he can make people nervous.
Yeah.
He makes he bullies. He has bombast. He does these things to prep the battlefield, as we say in the Pentagon. He does these things so that he can intimidate his opposition. The tariffs, and then he walks in to cut a deal, and they're much more malleable after he has kind of scared them and put political pressure on them. It's a horrible way in terms of humanity, it's a horrible way to treat someone else. It's a horrible diplomacy. It's not something the U.S. does, and I think it's so striking to Europeans and others to see the Americans acting this way. But it has an impact.
It does.
And he knows that.
So the big unknown is what he will do with 5 core US Air Force Europe, the destroyers based out of Rota. As I understand it, this is still an intense debate within the administration about whether it's time to draw down those forces and position them elsewhere on the globe. I think the balance of opinion I've heard this week is that everything kind of stays where it is. What do you think?
Well, so it's the force posture review, and we do those every 4 years or so, and they always are exciting to see where we end up. And there's a lot behind them. There's a lot of politics, domestic politics behind that. There's a lot of things that make this a very difficult review to do. I don't think it's going to be left exactly the same. I think they're going to do a couple things probably. You've heard them talk about the Africa Command and the European Command. They're both in Europe.
Yep.
And at one time they worked together. Then they were separated out, and now they're talking about putting them back together again. So it's not like this has never been done. But what is different here is that they've said, well, look, there's an American 4-star general who is the head of the European Command. General Cavoli is the one now. He wears 2 hats. He runs the U.S. forces in Europe, but he also runs NATO forces. Mm-hmm. He's the SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. So what they might say this time is, we're going to bring those 2 commands together, Africa and Europe. We're going to take off one of those hats from the commander of European Command. We're going to take off that NATO hat, and we're going to give it to a European.
No.
They could very well do that. It's a signal to Europe saying, we're serious about you all taking over the defense of Europe. It's something that shows Trump doing something. It kind of, as we say, pins the rose on the Europeans that you had better hurry because your man is in charge of NATO forces when they go. the hooker in all of this is that I don't think this is a law, but certainly by customs and tradition, American forces can only be commanded by an American general. This is why SACEUR is always an American. That came out of World War I, by the way, which is a whole other story. So this would kind of fly in the face of how we've always done things. But this certainly shows a seriousness in the United States about who's in charge of the fight in Europe. So that's one thing I think is going to happen. The second thing I think is they're going to probably pull out, I'm going to say 10 to 20,000 U.S. forces, because that's what Trump wanted to do and Trump won. Mm-hmm. He issued the order and it was slow-rolled by the military because they didn't want to do that pull. And so by the time the election happened, they were able to, the Biden administration came in, that was the first thing they canceled was that order. I've heard that Trump's saying, well, guess what, I'm back. And just for spite, he might pull those forces out of Germany. He was trying to punish the Germans at the time. It was a miracle.
I remember.
And so he was going to move them to Poland. So he could do something along those lines as well. Biden put in about 20,000 forces after the proper invasion of Ukraine in 2022. So it might be that he's going to pull those out. It's a sop also to Putin. Putin wants U.S. forces drawn down. So this is a concession with nothing in return, but this is a concession to Putin, a sweetener, if you will, maybe to get him to the table. And so there's other things at work here, and I think that makes me feel that there will be something happening in Europe.
Well, Jim, you filled me with dread, because I think a lot of European defence and security commentators, especially those of us that have been practitioners of late, would say, draw down the Fifth Corps, take away the US Air Force Europe, take away the destroyers, they can always come back. But SACEUR must remain an American, because if you want to sort of, for exactly the point that you make, you've just put a massive barrier in place to US reinforcement of NATO if it is not an American general at the very top of the structure, because that is a requirement of the American government, the American people, that their troops are commanded by an American. And I think we would all take the reduction of tens of thousands of troops instead of the loss of a US SACEUR.
But I think that's the debate going on. It has been kicked around as an idea for a number of years, having the SACEUR be a European. That was back in terms of the signal towards Europe to increase defense spending, et cetera, and this was part of that debate. So this is not something new. It's been kicked around. It's easy to do for Trump to do. He doesn't have to necessarily, I don't think, have to go to Congress, or he's going to have to increase taxes. This is something that's easy to do. It's not costly, but the signal is a powerful one. But I will say that in a lot of ways, this is something that if you do it the right way, it's not just yanking them out of Mons, the military headquarters in Brussels and Belgium, but you do it in such a way that it's phased in, and American is the deputy. There's ways you can, in the NATO way, you can always package something that takes some of the sting out of it, and maybe that's what they do. But it's just, and I agree with you. I don't want to see that happen either. But it just seems the context, the background, the mood music I'm getting out of the White House that's something that they wouldn't necessarily disagree doing.
What a fascinating conversation. Jim Townsend, thank you so much for joining me. You've been watching Superpowers, the future of global security, here on Times Radio. For more of Superpowers and all the other fantastic geopolitical content that Times Radio produce, make sure you subscribe to this YouTube channel. But for now, see you next week.